What is going on with pro-lifers blocking abolition bills? Well, let's talk to Ben Ziesloft about it. Stick around. Exploring theology, doctrine, and all of the fascinating subjects in between, broadcasting from an undisclosed location, Dead Men Walking starts
now.
Well, hello. Welcome, guys, to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. As always, you can find out more about us at dmwpodcast.com or find us on socials, Dead Men Walking Podcast, or Twitter X at Real DMW Podcast, where right now, if you're listening to this, the date comes out. We are in the middle of the final 3 days of our 2025 Best Reform Podcast bracket. It has been absolutely amazing, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're also going to talk about pro-life and abolition stuff. But first, guys, got to tell you really quick, have you ever been to a Bible conference and you get back and you're excited? You're like, man, that was awesome. I was around people. We heard good sermons, good talks. I'd love to do something like that at my church, but I don't know how we could get a conference here. Well, I've got the answer for you. Andrew Rappaport at Striving for Eternity Ministries, that's what he does. He has done hundreds, thousands of conferences, and he can help you build it from the ground up. Not only will he come out and speak, but he has speakers lined up on every subject, anything from the family, social justice, cessationism, apologetics, evangelism, creation, signs, how to interpret the Bible, all those different subjects. He can even bring out speakers for you, organize it, get you there, and you guys can have a conference at your church. Doesn't matter if it's big or small, doesn't matter the size, doesn't matter where it's at in the United States. He travels. Go check him out at strivingforeternityministries.org. You can just click on the contact section. It'll take you right to his email and contact information. Shoot him an email. Andrew Rappaport, Striving for Eternity Ministries. Yeah, but so if you guys are listening to this right now, we are in the throes of the final rounds of our podcast bracket. I do it every year right around this time, February or March. The first year we started out with 16 Reformed podcasts on Twitter X. That's the only place you can vote for it, on my channel at Real DMW Podcast. And we started out with 16 the first year, and it was just 16 podcasts that had been on our podcast, and thought it would be fun. It was hugely popular. Then it went to 32 the next year. Then we expanded it to 64 last year. And this year we started with 128. So for since February 10th, and I believe this is coming out on, what date is it coming out? The 19th. So for 9 days, I have been every morning putting together brackets, posting them on X, and people have been voting. And we've already had over 1 million views. Over 75,000 votes have been cast, and it's only going to get crazier as we get closer and closer. So if you're listening to this and it's Wednesday, the 19th, the day it came out, February, we are going until the 21st. So you got 2 days left to go vote. So go check that out, guys, and go vote over there for your favorite Reformed podcast. And there's a lot of good ones. But with that being said, this week I had Ben Ziesloft on. Found him on Twitter X. We engaged back and forth on some stuff. And there's some stuff that's been going on in the pro-life establishment recently with them, especially more specifically Kristan Hawkins, basically blocking abolition bills in North Dakota and other states. And this has been a running theme since Roe v. Wade got overturned, to where, well, I should say well before that, it was a running theme that the pro-life establishment and all their subsidiaries do not want to truly abolish abortion. And their biggest sticking point, it seems to be, is, well, you can't have criminal penalties for people who commit an abortion. And you ask them, you say to the pro-life person, do you believe abortion is murder? And they say, yes, we believe life begins at conception. And they say, do you want to see abortion abolished? They say, yes. And then the abolitionist says, well, if abortion is murder, then the preborn should have every protection under the law, just as someone who is born. So if you murder the preborn, you will have criminal consequences, tried by a jury of your peers through the justice system. And the pro-life movement does not like that. So they actively stop bills, abolition bills, that have that provision in it that go to state houses and state legislatures, and the most recent one in North Dakota. And Kristan Hawkins, who is I can't remember who Ben said, college students for life or something like that. He said she works for. She's pretty prominent. A lot of people know her. She got in a Twitter uproar and started cussing out, abolitionists and blocking them. Well, I shouldn't say cussing out. She was using rude language and blocking them and saying they're a bunch of crazy people. And then someone made a meme and she wrote a cease and desist letter with her attorneys, spending the organization's money on threatening to sue someone for posting a meme. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. But this is a lady who claims to be a Christian, who says she works in the pro-life movement, but when an abolition bill comes to the Senate floor, she blocks it and she fights against it. She takes their massive resources and monies they've raised from people who are pro-life and say, no, we're going to shoot down this pro-life bill because they don't believe that someone who murders a baby through abortion should face any legal consequences. And I would say, and Ben and I talk about this, that you're going to hear shortly, it just doesn't follow logically. You just basically have to have blinders on or be willfully ignorant to say, yes, abortion is murder. Yes, life begins at conception. But no, if someone commits a murder, they shouldn't be held liable for that murder. They're a victim, is what they say. The women are always a victim. And I made some points in there how I likened it to voter ID and kind of how that statement is sexist and voter ID is racist. And you can hear more about that when you listen to the episode. But it was a good conversation. Ben is the editor of The Sentinel. He just has a new book out, too, called Forsakers of the Fatherless, The Secret Treachery of the Pro-Life Establishment, which is a very fun title there. That'll get your attention. We'll link up the book below, too, so you can check out his book if you want to purchase it and read through it. So it all kinds of ties in that this just happened to be happening on Twitter, got a big uproar, and then we got our abolitionist expert in here to talk about it, pro-life abolitionist expert. So that's all I have for you now. Go vote in the bracket. Listen to the podcast. Hey, guys, share with a friend. That's how we grow. Glory to God. Check us out and, support us on the merch page too at dmwpodcast.com. But guys, that's all I got for you today. Next voices you hear are going to be me and Ben. Here we go. So cool, Ben. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. Just reached out to you a few days ago and you said, yeah, I'll jump on. So appreciate you doing it on such short notice. And I've only really known of you online for probably the last couple months. So this is a new introduction. First time on the podcast. Thanks for being on Dead Men.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about you. Give us the origin story of Ben Ziesloft, maybe a little background, how you grew up. Just let us, the listeners, know a little bit about you.
Sure. So currently I serve as the editor of the Editor of The Sentinel, so we're a conservative news outlet owned and operated by Christians. I am a writer and editor. I have been ever since I graduated from college and grew up in the Pittsburgh area, grew up in a evangelical home, went to a mega church essentially growing up, and when I went to college, I think that's when I was saved. Encountered a really solid Bible study. My freshman year, started going to a PCA church out here in Philadelphia. So that's a very quick background, but got involved in abortion ministry also in college and going to the abortion mills and sharing the gospel and trying to help moms choose life. So very passionate about the abortion issue for sure.
So you married? Have any kids? Any children?
Yep. Married. We're coming up on 3 years of marriage. No kids yet.
Oh, awesome. 3 years. So yeah, a little younger than me. That's a nice time too, that first couple years too. Did you know your wife for a long time before you got married, or was it pretty quick?
Couple years. So I was her econ tutor in college. That's how we met originally. We figured out we were both Christians, and so we were just friends for a couple years and just knew each other. COVID was big, and I was in school in 2020, so everybody got sent home for about a year. So we kind of kept touch through that, and then when school basically came back for all intents and purposes, we started dating.
I like it. Well, that's awesome, man. And we're going to get along famously because I kind of, just from what you said, I kind of have close to the same type of testimony. Said the sinner's prayer at 7 and got saved at 23, as I like to famously say. Especially actually going through the Bible, reading it for myself, removing the tradition of man, and actually just looking at the actual doctrines of the Bible, really starting to understand the doctrines of grace and things like that. I now identify as Reformed Presbyterian myself, attending Christ the Word Church in Sylvania, Ohio. But I say it's pretty funny. You can't even say the word identifying anymore without there being a stigma to it. I feel like even when I just said that there, I was like, but they can't have our words. We're taking them back. But you've got a new book out, Forsakers of the Fatherless, The Secret Treachery of the Pro-Life Establishment. Man, ooh, what a title. Tell me a little bit about this book that's coming out, published by Founders Ministry, no less.
Absolutely. So, Forsakers of the Fatherless essentially tracks the past decade or so of Christians entering their state legislatures and trying to pass abolition bills, equal protection bills, and basically being confronted by the pro-life establishment being the groups that stop them. So you would think, and I think most Christians would still think, that it's the pro-choice Democrats, it's Planned Parenthood who are killing most efforts to end abortion. And really, in many states, not every state, it's mostly red states and purple states, but in many states, it's actually the pro-life establishment that's standing in the way of equal protection. So I cover 8 states. I interview Christians from those states. I talk to even the pro-life leaders in those states in interviews via email, phone, and really try to give Christians the issue at hand and make sure they understand what's going on, so they're equipped to go out and actually end abortion.
So what did you find in the writing of this book? Did you find like your suspicions or the reality that you had in the movement were true or false, or what kind of came out of the writing of the book?
Absolutely. It's a very consistent pattern across the country where you have sort of the same handful of pro-life establishment groups that are opposing equal protection. So it really boils down to 2 or 3 reasons. The main ones being a lack of willingness to criminalize the mother. There's a lot of ideology surrounding the second victim narrative, which I'm sure you've heard of, where a lot of pro-life groups will say that categorically women are victims of abortion, rather than actually willing participants, not all the time, but most of the time when abortions happen. And the other is just simple political pragmatism. You'll hear excuses like, well, Roe isn't overturned yet. But then once Roe got overturned, the excuses continued, and it became, we need to win our next election, the midterms are next year, something like that. So it's unfortunately the same kind of pattern, and that's how we got 50 plus years of having legalized abortion under Roe. And now that Roe is gone, the excuse should be gone. But really, we're in the same state, if not worse, in a lot of red states and purple states than we were while Roe was in effect.
Yeah, and look, you're a lot younger than I am, so when you say the same patterns, I've seen those same patterns over the last 20 plus years of working with candidates, and they use the pro-life platform to get reelected, and then the excuses from there kind of flower. Oh, we don't have majority. Oh, it's not a bill that the governor will sign. Oh, we can't do that. It won't get out of committee. It doesn't have support, right? And what I found and got really frustrated with were many, and I mean 20 years ago, almost all of the pro-life candidates, and the majority of those being on the Republican side, were really using the platform to raise money, get reelected, and really do nothing in the way of writing legislation that would protect the preborn and the unborn. And it got very frustrating for me. And I didn't, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I didn't really have an understanding 15, 20 years ago of what abolition was. I just went, well, I'm not the same type of pro-life you are, because I would look at my legislators and I go, do you believe abortion is murder? And they would say, absolutely, life begins at conception. And I said, should there be penalties for murder? Right? Well, yes, if someone is out murder someone else, they should be tried by a jury of their peers, and whatever, the legal ramifications of that classification of murder or homicide or manslaughter or whatever it is. But as soon as you start talking about, okay, well, man or woman, whether a woman carrying a child commits a murder with abortion, or even a man who is an accomplice to that, they should both be held liable if we truly believe that abortion is murder. And the logic would fall apart on them, and we would get those excuses like you're talking about, right? Well, we can never do that. Women are a victim.
Right.
And I don't know of one case where a woman has unknowingly aborted a child. Now, there might be some very rare instances out there, depending on age or maybe mental capacity or something like that. But I would say, well, then every person who commits an act of murder should be tried by a jury of their peers, and we could clear that up very quickly. I'm not saying without judge and jury, they face consequence. I say they go through the justice system like every other person who commits a crime, and they're tried justly. But no one has any appetite for that in the pro-life industry, and I'm kind of wondering why. What do you think the main reason is why we get pushback from legislators and activists when we bring it up and go, well, let's follow the logical conclusion. If you're truly saying that you believe it's murder, then there should be consequences for those who commit murder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few levels to that. One is ideological. So, for whatever reason, the pro-life movement that developed over the past 50 years was a big tent movement. They want to include Roman Catholics, Protestants, secularists, atheists. There are various groups out there called Secular for Life and things like that. Feminists for Life. They're trying to just build this big tent. So what they really end up doing is they start turning away from Christian doctrine and try to become all things to all people rather than looking to the law of God, which says, you should not show partiality in judgment. So if you're a man or a woman, black or white, whatever the case may be, if you committed willing conduct that should be criminalized, you should face penalties under the law. None of those factors should actually matter, rich or poor, whatever the case may be. But also there's the pragmatic element where you said, they're basically trying to get that 100% pro-life label, especially in certain red states and red districts, is really important. So there's this game that gets played between the pro-life groups and the Republican leadership, where they basically just pass whatever bills they need to inch the ball forward, or so they think. They're not really trying to end abortion. They're trying to regulate it for another meaningless way. So, for example, requiring a proper burial for a baby you just murdered rather than just forbidding the murder in the first place. Or banning certain methods of abortion rather than just banning the practice of abortion altogether. It'd be just as silly as trying to ban murder with guns but not with knives, right? It doesn't matter what method you use. The fact is you committed the act of murder, and you should be criminalized accordingly. No matter who you are, or as long as you're proven, like you said, in a court of law to have willingly done that, then you should face a penalty. Otherwise, we're saying that the baby in the womb is not as human or is subhuman relative to a person outside the womb. So all these things are really simple, but I think what was really happening is the abolitionists are trying to peel through layers of ideology that accumulated over the years for whatever reason, and we're starting to see that happen, and we're about to talk about Students for Life as well, but we're starting to see that happen very publicly, even with some of these big pro-life groups where people are realizing that these groups aren't actually, there are things in the way of them that are, that stop them from actually ending abortion.
Yeah, and I would even say here, and this might show a little bit of my, I don't want to say cynicism, but maybe I'm jaded a little bit just from having worked in that industry, kind of like it sounds like you have. It's a little bit of self-preservation too. Like big pharma does not want to cure cancer, right? They want to sell you the drugs that allows you to live with cancer. And what I found with a lot of these pro-life organizations and within that pro-life establishment, we don't want to abolish abortion. We want to regulate it and allow you to live with it, because their jobs would dry up overnight. And when I say jobs, I'm talking about multi-million dollar nonprofits. And hear me out. If anyone knows how a nonprofit works, it doesn't mean people don't make money, right? You have board members being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You have politicians being donated to. Right here in Michigan, where I'm from, Right to Life actually opposed an abolition bill. Right to Life, the largest pro-life organization, came out and said, we want nothing to do with this bill. And you have politicians who, when they get a Right to Life endorsement, with that comes a $20, $50, $80, $100,000 donation to their campaign, which makes it much easier for them to run for state house, state senate, governor, attorney general, right? Secretary of State in Michigan at the state level. If you get a $50,000 donation, sometimes that's half the money you need to run for that office. That's nice if you're if you're a politician, elected official that goes, that's all the less money I have to raise that goes to flyers and volunteers and door knockers and ads and radio spots and billboards, right, to get reelected. So I found in the political realm, it's really self-serving, which is sad. Now, I'm not to say there isn't a lot of hardworking pro-lifers that actually believe they want to see abortion end, right? But when you get down to the brass tacks of it, like you're saying of, well, then if we believe it's murder and we want to see it end, let's have it 100% abolished. It needs to be absolutely illegal for anyone to perform that. And if something's illegal, there has to be consequences, right, Ben? Right. I mean, we can't say this is outlawed, but there's no consequences if you break that law. I mean, that wouldn't work in any other area. Murder, rape, theft, fraud, embezzlement, right? Oh, this is illegal, but don't worry, there's no consequences if you break the law. And we're just simply saying, I think as abolitionists too, and as we said with slavery, there absolutely has to be consequences to murder. And it's unfortunate because we're seeing this broader pro-life establishment really kind of be called out after Roe fell. Because you're right, Ben, the excuse for years and decades was, well, pro-life, or I'm sorry, Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade isn't overturned, right? And abolitionists said, ignore Roe v. Wade. It's just an opinion. Doesn't mean the states can't make the laws. And now we're right back in that with Roe v. Wade being overturned. Like you said, Ben, some of this is even worse off than what we were before Roe v. Wade, because now the states have gone in the other direction. This brings us to Kristan Hawkins, who is in that pro-life establishment. And I've seen you really posting on X, and make sure you're following Ben. We'll have you shout that out, and we'll make sure we link it up below to follow Ben on X, because you have got lots of good content there. Tell us about the Kristan Hawkins situation, who she is, and why she's kind of come under fire over the last few days.
Absolutely. So Kristan Hawkins is the president of Students for Life and then Students for Life Action, so two very prominent pro-life organizations, especially geared towards student activism. So I believe they have 1,500 chapters in various schools across the country, universities, high schools, even younger schools than that, trying to basically educate the youth about pro-life and get them mobilized and involved. And it's useful because they can go and knock on doors. They have a lot of youthful energy about them. But over the past few days, so we need to back up to last week, actually, as of the time we're recording this, so early February, there was a bill of equal protection that advanced to the floor in North Dakota, and 16 Republicans voted in favor, and then 77 other lawmakers, both Democrat and Republican, voted against it. And one of the reasons was because the main pro-life groups in that state had spoken at a hearing and submitted testimony opposing the bill. So that's North Dakota Catholic Charities, Catholic Conference, I believe their title is, and a couple others. And then a year earlier, there was a separate measure to try to codify equal protection into the platform of the Republican Party in North Dakota. And that's when you saw a lot of national pro-life groups like Hawkins with Students for Life, Susan B. Anthony List, March for Life, National Right to Life. They wrote this joint letter, sort of like we saw a few years ago in Louisiana, to basically say we oppose anything that would ever criminalize a mother for having an abortion. Anything. Not just if she was coerced. I mean, we would oppose that too. If she was truly forced to have an abortion, nobody wants to criminalize her. But we're talking about willful conduct. And for the pro-life groups basically came out and said, because this equal protection resolution for the North Dakota Republican Party would possibly lead to the prosecution of women who willfully have abortions, we're going to oppose it. So the groundwork was laid in North Dakota to basically associate equal protection with a bad thing with the local Republican Party and their lawmakers and their officials. So you actually heard, I watched the whole floor debates in North Dakota last week. You heard a lot of those same talking points coming out from lawmakers. A couple of them cited that Louisiana letter that was cited in the North Dakota letter. So it's this big incestuous mass of pro-life groups that are trying to basically subvert and put a bad label around equal protection across the country. So that's why Kristan was receiving a lot of criticism, and she went on this whole tirade of blocking abolitionists, even people like Jeff Durbin and Bradley Pierce, who are just offering to, come on my podcast, let's have a debate, let's talk about it. Just lumping them on with, the slanderers and the people like that who do really exist in the abolitionist movement. So that's where we are right now. Most recently, she was threatening to sue Protestia for having a meme about her. Yeah. Like it's getting pretty unhinged, and we're receiving a lot of leaks at the Sentinel from people inside the organization, student activists, former employees, things like that. And there's really an internal crisis right now at Students for Life, where a lot of prominent activists are not happy with the fact that equal protection is being opposed. I'm talking to other pro-life leaders too, not just abolitionist leaders, people who would reject the term abolition, who agree that something needs to be done about the fact that these bills are getting killed across the country by groups like Students for Life.
Yeah, so a few things. One is the Sentinel, which you added. Are they going to be covering some of this? Can people, if they go there and look, you'll be covering it?
We just had an article today drop about it. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, and we'll direct people there. Two, this is very frustrating for me because if you watch some of Kristan Hawkins' videos from years past, she has some very good logical arguments when arguing with far leftists on this. And I have to think it's willful ignorance to take the next step and say, okay, if it's murder, then why isn't there consequences for murder? Because it's almost as if they put blinders on, and they have to realize that if it's the will of the people It's the will of the elected officials to vote that way. If they were to just step back, if their ultimate goal, because you talk to guys like Albert Mohler and all these, Al Mohler and all these guys, and they dance around it, but then they eventually say, yes, our goal is to have the complete abolition of abortion. If those groups in North Dakota were to step back and say, we're not going to put our thumb on the scale, and we're not going to threaten killing this bill, and we're not going to threaten money from the elected officials and campaign funds, I would think bills like this would pass in places like, well, it has in, Oklahoma and South Dakota and other places, and you would get the abolition of abortion. And it seems like their sticking point is, though, we don't want the complete abolition and the complete destruction of abortion if it's linked to people having criminal consequences for murder. That's what it really seems to me, and I don't know why that's the sticking point. If these bills are written, and I haven't seen an abolition bill that just says willy-nilly, we just choose a woman or a guy and say, oh, you're guilty, you're going to prison. It's in the criminal code, and you're tried by a jury of your peers, just like any other crime. I don't understand why they can't accept it. Are you seeing any of, what are the arguments that they're giving that someone who commits a crime that they say is a crime, they agree with us? I mean, Kristan Hawkins, if you were to ask her, do you believe abortion is murder? She says yes.
She says, yeah.
But then turns around and says, but anyone who commits that murder shouldn't face any criminal consequences for that. I don't know how, it has to be willful ignorance. You just have to put the blinders on, right? Because I just don't understand it. Is that what you think too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's ideological commitment. Like I said, I don't think there's really any basis in reality. Anybody who stood outside of a murder mill for any period of time, I've done it for 6 years now, can tell you that the women going in are not being dragged in by their boyfriend. They're not being coerced in by an abortion doctor who hunted them down in the street and grabbed them noticing they're pregnant. Nothing like that. It's women who are going in and in many cases flipping you the bird or screaming at you and, saying things like, I love abortion so much, I'm going to get another after this. Just this weekend I was at the mill in Philadelphia, and the Eagles just won, so they had their victory parade on Friday and everything. So one of the women going in screamed, "Go Birds!" To drown us out when we were legitimately just asking her, "Come talk to us. We'd love to help you. Here's cards for our pregnancy center." Nothing crazy, not screaming in her face, just normal appeals to somebody we want to care for, and that's the response we got. But to your point, yeah. It's very simple to debunk the whole second victim narrative. So Students for Life actually got community noted a month or two ago for making that claim that 60% of abortions are coerced. So if you look at the source for that data point, it's actually from Susan B. Anthony List. Two of their researchers at the Lazier Institute actually made this study, did this big survey, looked at survey data, basically asking women for why they had abortions. And I believe two of the categories were financial pressures and other circumstances. And those were the two biggest reasons that were given by these women, way more than, facing pressure from a boyfriend or from a parent or a family member. And that data is used to run and say that, yes, most women are coerced. So Foundation to Abolish Abortion has the stats and all that. So encourage folks to look at that. But it's really, again, it's an ideological commitment because everybody really knows it's not true. I'm sure a lot of pro-lifers do. I think people like Kristan Hawkins do sincerely believe it. And they're, for whatever reason, they're too emotionalized in their argumentation to really grapple with that fact. But the result is that these bills are dying across the country and babies are still being murdered, and we have to stop it.
Yeah, I would point out too that coerced and convinced are two different things. Coerced is a legal term, and there's a much higher standard and evidence of proof for coerced. Convinced, and even if you are, take any other crime and go before a judge and say, "I'm sorry, judge, my friend convinced me to rob that liquor store." Well, that's not an excuse for breaking the law because you were convinced by someone or talked into. You still have choices. You still have your depraved free will that makes those choices, and it's in nature. And we have to stand accountable for those if we make them. And now, look at this. People might listen to this and go, "Greg, you sound so heartless," right? This is what they really try to do in the pro-life establishment is pull on your heartstrings. The woman, she was under pressure. She was coerced, whatever that is. Look at, I'm on the right, And I don't think the left has a good argument in their racist argument of voter ID laws. Oh, black people are too poor. Hispanics are too dumb to get a voter ID, right? I don't hold to that type of logic for that. I say that's racist. That's insane. That's insulting when you take a group of people and say they're so poor, so dumb, so backwards, they can't go down and get a voter ID. And black people and Hispanics and all kinds of minorities, when you interview them, they go, that's insane that people would say, Democrats say that. I'm not going to take that same type of argument from the pro-life establishment that say, oh, women aren't smart enough. They just don't understand. They're too emotional, too feeble-minded to understand what it is that they're doing when they have an abortion. So I don't think we should accept those type of illogical and horrible arguments. One, I would say racist. One, I would say sexist, in saying women don't know what they're doing when they do this. And I don't hear a lot of abolitionists even, because here's the thing. I've heard the good biblical arguments, right? What's the gentleman's name? T. Russell Hunter.
Yes.
I think has been on the podcast before, and we had a debate with him with pro-life guys, and he came on and he talked, right? And when you're talking from a biblical aspect, which look at all God's law undergirds all of our moral underpinnings and laws of this country anyway, but you're going to have people that go, I don't believe in God. I don't believe what your Bible says. I don't care, right? So sometimes, look at, I do argue from the transcendent moral law of God, but I can also argue abortion philosophically. I can argue it constitutionally. I can argue it scientifically. Like, take your pick. We win on every single argument, right? Of those four buckets. And I haven't heard a lot of abolitionists or just people in general who believe for equal protection of the preborn, of saying logically, philosophically, scientifically, legally speaking, under the philosophical heading, we have an understanding that if you commit an act against another human being, then you suffer the legal consequences of that. And it's tough for me because we have people like Kristan Hawkins, and I saw a post that you just made, I think today, raking in $300,000 and now a year to go around and talk about this stuff. Now that's just what's reported. Believe me.
Right.
I'm a business owner. I've worked in politics. There's ways to put stuff on paper. And if you worked with mega churches, you understand there's ways to, it could be much, much more than that. What she's reporting legally, $300,000+ to basically go around, install in retard, in the sense, move back, slow down actual progress towards abolishing abortion. I mean, how does that sit with guys like you in organizations that you work with that go, no, we actually want to see the abolition. We want to see the abolishment of abortion. And you have people like this, like Kristan, who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to basically put up roadblocks.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't necessarily look into the heart of every single pro-lifer who's making a lot of money. A lot of them are making a lot of money to do this sort of thing. I think some of them are convinced that they're doing the right thing by opposing this legislation and opposing equal protection because of ideology, because they've just adopted it, and for pride or whatever reason, they're not backing down from it. But you're right, the money is in the fight. There's a clear financial incentive that can't be ignored. And for the record, if Kristan Hawkins or somebody like her were making $300 million a year and shutting down abortion state after state, I would donate to that if it were working. But, the fact that she's making a lot of money and they're actually subverting abolition is a huge deal, because they're going to churches, they're going to Christians, they're fundraising, they're saying, give us money and we'll steward it to end abortion. And they're doing the opposite. I don't think most Christians know that. And the more and more time goes on, especially after Roe, more people are realizing that. And that's why you're seeing this big paradigm shift away from pro-life-ism to just abolition.
You are correct about that. One good thing that came out of Roe v. Wade overturned is shedding light on the pro-life establishment and industry. And I'm hopeful, and I hope you're hopeful too. Let me know as we finish this episode up here. I'm hopeful that it sheds more light and more people in the general pro-life movement, right, that just go, hey, I'm pro-life, and maybe they give $50 a year somewhere, or they go to a special dinner once a year their church has, and they're not active in it. They just know they're against abortion, and they believe the pro-life establishment when they say, hey, we want to end abortion. And they go, okay, I did something for that. I think that general person in that category is starting to understand more, like you said, Ben, starting to understand more that, there is a difference between abolition and actually the pro-life machine, as I call it, right? Like their eyes are starting to be open and like, wait a minute, these guys oppose these bills. They don't want to truly end abortion, because that's ultimately what it is they don't. They want to, like you said at the top of the show, they want to regulate it, which is very sinister if you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to throw out accusations, but it is what it is. Like, hey, we want to be able to raise money off this, elect officials off it, regulate it. We don't truly want to end it. And that's what we're seeing over the last couple of years when Roe v. Wade overturned, or however long it's been. Yeah, it's about 18 months, 2 years, a couple of years, is this regulation of it. And I really do. I go back to Big Pharma. Like, we don't want to cure anything. We just want to sell you the medication for it. But as we end this up here, Ben, so what do we do going forward? For those of us who truly want to see an end to this heinous crime, the most vulnerable people in the womb, the preborn, being slaughtered by the millions. We've legalized child sacrifice now. It's done with white gloves in hospitals by insurance instead of at the altar in fire. What do we do to curb this, to turn this back? What's the good fight that the common man and woman should be fighting?
Yeah, the church needs to wake up. I think that's exactly right. The Christians in this country, there are tens of millions of us. We are a massive political force. Evangelicals are some of the most reliably conservative voters. If we actually get involved and make our voices heard besides voting every 4 years, this would change very quickly. So this part of what my book is trying to do is just give people like a treasure trove of data. Here's 50,000 words, several hundred pages of, legislation and quotes, public comments that these groups are making. And take that and do with it what you will, but know that these groups are not ending abortion. You need a paradigm shift. Mike Johnson, for example, thinking of, your comment about regulationism. He had a reputation as a pro-life hero when he was a lawmaker in Louisiana. If you look at the sort of bills he was writing, there was one that I look at in the book where it says, it's a dismembered abortion ban, if I remember correctly, and says you can't crush a baby's head with, a forcep and a couple other things. And then the very next paragraph is, this is not to say that you can't kill a baby by vacuuming it out of the womb. So it's actually giving explicit legal permission to do other types of abortion. So the church needs to wake up. They need to be aware of these things. The temptation right now is because Trump won, because Roe is over, is to basically say that, the fight is over. I think a lot of people, especially in states like Texas and Oklahoma, would assume that abortion has pretty much ended because there's no more Planned Parenthood clinics. But now there's this big self-managed abortion crisis where women are ordering pills from blue states or from other countries to murder their babies in the comfort of their own homes. So there's these massive issues that don't get solved without equal protection, equal justice, equal penalties. So that's really what I'm trying to accomplish. And, I pray that there be hundreds of thousands, millions more Christians who are making their voices heard, and whether that's abortion mill ministry, whether that's lobbying in the state legislature, whether that's giving money to good abolitionist groups instead of pro-life groups, whatever the case may be. If we actually, pray and act in accordance with what God has commanded concerning this issue, we're going to see abortion abolished by the grace of God.
Amen. So Ben Ziesloft, Forsakers of the Fatherless, The Secret Treachery of the Pro-Life Establishment, published by Founders Ministries. Tell people where they can find the book. Tell people where they can follow you on socials, and we'll make sure we get it linked up below as well.
Yep, absolutely. On X, I'm at Ben Ziesloft. Same handle, I believe, on Instagram. I don't use Instagram as much. So the pre-sale link should be available for the book on April 1st. So I'll try to keep my followers on those platforms updated. But and also you can follow the Sentinel. We're at Repub Sentinel on X. We just dropped a subscription platform actually today. So if people want to sign up for that, they're welcome to as well.
All right, Ben, we'll get it linked up so people can find you. Appreciate you being on today, man. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, thanks for listening to another episode of Dead Men Walking Podcast. As always, you can find out more about us at dmwpodcast.com. Go support the show. You can find some of this merch. We got the mugs on there. Wine 'em, dine 'em, Romans 9 'em is a fun one. And, of course, the newest shirt out, Job 13:5. How about you shut up and let that be your wisdom? Sometimes you just got to speak Bible verses to the pagans, even if they don't like it. Remember, guys, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. God bless. Be sure to check us out at dmwpodcast.com, where you can purchase the best and snarkiest merch on the internet, support the show, and leave us a review or message. Dead Men Walking can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Dead Men Walking Podcast, and on Twitter X at Real DMW Podcast. The Dead Men Walking Podcast is part of the Fight Laugh Feast Network. For exclusive show content, be sure to download the PubTV app and become a member. If you're a business that needs to reach hundreds of thousands of potential customers in your demographic, podcast advertising might be for you. Send all inquiries to deadmenwalkingpodcast@gmail.com.
None your biscuit.